Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. All right, friends, it's another Uposatha. With the good fortune things work out that we can get together tonight. And here I am broadcasting from yet another location in my travels. So on our recent get together, we had the day long on impermanence, and afterwards the question came up: what is perception, and could you explain perception? And I got back to thinking, and over the course of many talks, many gatherings, we've talked about the five aggregates, but maybe it's time once again to take a look at this set of teachings, tease out the nuances, figure out what they are, and also look a bit at why they are. Why the five aggregates? Why the five khandhas? Why even bother learning these? And in almost every get together, anytime when practitioners are sitting around talking, that question gets answered. This is an important framework? It's a useful framework. So let's take a look at it tonight. Now we have experience, right? We have a universe. We are here. And in Buddhism, we do something rather particular, which is not always done in religion, but we focus on Dhamma. And Dhamma literally means thing. It means natural. It means truth. We look at Dhammas. Specifically, we look at those things which actually exist, rather than focusing on philosophies or asking whys and hows and wheres and all of these questions and trying to figure things out which we can't see. Is there a God? Is there a meaning of life? Where does this all come from? Does it have a beginning? Does it have an end? Rather than doing any of that, we say, what if we're just going to look at what is? We'll look at the Dhammas. We'll look at the stuff which is happening. And this is where we will focus. And so it's undeniable we exist. There is something happening. And that is what we're talking about, and that's also why we are talking. So we have a universe, and there is no appropriate scale for this universe. There is no permanent, fixed, best way of looking at the universe. There is a macroscopic scale, and there is a microscopic scale. And then there's everything in between. And we find that no matter where we're looking at it, all of the same things are arising. And furthermore, the question of what is beyond these two extremes doesn't seem to apply. Yeah, we go out to the very furthest reaches of the universe. Yeah, out to the point where the trailing edge of even the light emitted from stars is behind us. And if we were to get out to that point, space would continue out in front of us. If we were to ask questions about what is out there beyond even the light, even the electromagnetic radiation that we have gotten out past, the question would be useless. Yeah. Now, we would realize that space without stuff is infinite, is pointless. Yeah. We would turn around and we would look at the universe that we have just left, and we would realize that, well, that's where I want to be. That's where there's something to talk about. Yeah. And so even if we think in the scale of planets and universes and galaxies, we think of all of the forces of gravity and space and time and light, wormholes and stars going supernova, still we would end up turning around at the limit of that and saying, yeah, but but why? Why do I feel what I feel? Yeah. And so also if a scientist were to peek into a super powerful microscope, and I keep hearing about more and more powerful microscopes. Apparently, after they got fed up with electron microscopes, or they could fire electrons at something and see them bounce off, they're like, there's got to be a. They even have a microscope that kind of it has this little device that sort of they drag across something, and and if there's something there, it'll kind of lift up in the tiniest perceptible little way. So they're using the electron microscope on this little thing, and if there's a piece of an atom there, this little thing will go up the tiniest little bit. And even if we were to examine to the tiniest possible degree, we would find that there are particles, and then there is space between those particles. And we got down to the smallest possible scale. We would find that there would be no point in going any smaller, because we'd see a particle there and a particle there and nothing in between. And we'd say, well, all that we really care about is there and there. This in-between stuff seems to be quite infinite, and we could look smaller and smaller, but what would be the point? Yeah. And so we have to admit that there is a universe, and that there is big and there is incredibly tiny, and there is this whole range of in between, and yet in all of this diversity, there is no common element. Yeah. For electrons flying about, the small scale is really important, but for asteroids flying about, the big scale is really important. And for the human scale, I mean, it just depends on where we're looking, which is the most important. But at the end of the day, the one thing that unifies it all is this person going, yeah, but why? Yeah, but what? This person that if they got out to the edge of it all, they would end up turning around and being like, well, I want to be back there with the electrons and the asteroids, because nothing doesn't have as much meaning. And so this is the unifying factor. And what when we sit down in meditation and we start to really try to figure things out, this is what we notice, and this is what the Buddha noticed, is that the question of like, what is all of this, isn't really useful, because it doesn't unify anything. You say, what is that? Or what is that? There's a different answer for each question. But at the end of the day, suffering is, there is still some being that is trying to get an answer to that question, and that unifies it all. It doesn't matter if we're at the big scale or the small scale, still we feel things and we want to know why. And so all of the Dhamma, all of the Buddha's teaching is to help us with this conundrum. The first thing to know about this teaching, the five aggregates, before we even look at them themselves, is the why of the five aggregates. And the why of the five aggregates is, this is a tool for us to understand ignorance, craving, and suffering. This is what this is for. This is not an ultimate truth. This is not the ultimate reality. We are not more real when we are sitting and looking at the five aggregates than when we're sitting trying to think of what we're going to have for dinner. It's just this framework allows us to answer that question of why we're craving, what are we craving, and would it be like to not crave? Yeah. This framework helps us do this, helps us look at what is Dhamma, what is actually happening, so that we can pull apart all the things that we think are happening, all the things that we want to be happening, all the things that we wish weren't happening. We could get rid of all of that and just accept what is happening. And through accepting, we let go, and through letting go, we're actually able to solve this one unifying conundrum that the Buddha called dukkha, or suffering. And in solving that, then all of the questions of scale and why and how and where does it come from and where is it going are solved by solving that person who's trying to find the answer. Well, when that person no longer needs an answer to these questions, the question has been solved. Yeah, but it's not solved through getting an answer. It's solved through asking, why do we want the answer? The five aggregates are our tool for solving the conundrum which produces that question in the first place. Now, the five aggregates themselves, if you're Buddhist, you're Theravada Buddhist, you've probably come across these pretty quickly. You come across these, but we have form or rupa, we have feeling or vedana, we have perception or sanya, we have sankhara or formations, and we have consciousness, which is vijnana. And we'll talk about each of these in turn so that we can look at them and find them. And we will start obviously with form. Now, form is something which is used to describe physical stuff, physical is maybe even, but stuff, dhammas, tangible things which have a location, space and time, they exist. And you know them because they bump up against other forms, We know them because they follow rules. We know them because when you go to bed at night, you fall asleep, you wake up the next morning and you're still in a universe populated with stuff. So we find out through that experiment, which we conduct every night, that stuff doesn't need us to exist. Form exists. And this is actually very profound reality of form, is that it exists and it doesn't need the mind to exist. So when the Buddha is laying things out, is that form has a location. You can describe form, you can locate form, you can drag a little pointer and it goes blink. When you're dragging it across form, there is something there. Form is there. And an interesting quality of form is that when two minds are examining the same form, they sometimes come up to the same conclusions about that form, because the form is different from the minds that are perceiving that form. So the form is not affected by them. It is there and it has its own qualities, regardless if something's looking at it or not. Because it already solves a conundrum of quantum physics there, which is that things might only exist if we're looking for them. Well, it's actually, that's the function of form, is that its stuff is there. The question of like what is form though is exceeding the bounds, because form of an asteroid and form of an atom are really quite, they follow sort of different rules. And Newtonian physics kind of work at the big scale, but not at the small scale. And quantum physics work at the small scale, but not really at the big scale. Nevertheless, form is simply referring to that it has substance, quality of it. And what rules it follows are going to just be a function of, different scales. It'll perform differently. But you need time for that to make any sense at all. It's like in the moment, form is just there. And the Buddha divides everything else. So our five khandhas, or five aggregates, form is in one side and everything else is what is called mana, or mental dhammas. Nama dhammas are what they're called. And you have basically form and function, form and the name. So one, it has substance, and all the other ones don't have an actual substance. They don't have a location in time and space. You know them through seeing the processes of the mind playing out over time. You can't point to them, you can't locate them. But with form you can. The final thing to say about form is that when we start to accept that form exists, that it is real, it is tangible, and it continues to exist without the need for the nama dhammas, without the need for the mental dhammas, we start to see a very important quality of our experience, which is that this form is not us, is not ours. It is independent of everything that we think, everything that we perceive. All of the things that we do are independent of this form, and that the nama dhammas, the mental dhammas, are merely perceiving this form. Yeah. And so when we begin to realize this, we see that separation. Say, well, everything that's going on in the mental realm is separate from the form itself. Yeah. And seeing this, we realize that there's no stability to be found in form. It's going to follow natural principles and change and grow old and decay and be formed into new forms, to arise and to cease and to come and to go, whether or not we like it, whether or not we're paying attention. You know, it will just continue to follow its natural principles based on physics and cause and effect. And seeing that it is unstable in this way, that it is not held by our mental processes, we realize that there's no happiness to be found in it. If there were a happiness, it would be fleeting. And we let go of the idea of happiness. And letting go of the idea of any happiness to be found in physical stuff, we let go of the idea that this physical stuff is in any way us, that there is any way a person to be found of physical stuff, because physical stuff is just physical stuff. And we have to acknowledge that most of what we're willing to believe is us, it cannot be, that's physical stuff cannot be located over there. Yeah, it cannot be following these physical rules, independent of all the other things that are going on. And in seeing all these things about physical form, we let go of physical form. We relinquish physical form. And in doing so, an amount of suffering ceases, yeah? We don't need to answer any more questions about it. It's enough to simply know that it is there. Now I'm going to jump to the fifth aggregate. In this presentation, the numbers doesn't matter that much. Yeah, I'm going to jump to the fifth one before the middle three, because it kind of deals a lot with form. And so I want to keep those two close together. So when we have a mind, the Buddha explains in Dependent Origination that the first thing that happens in this process he calls dependent origination is there is the idea that there is a being. And then because of this idea that there is a being, there are volitional activities. Basically, there's an expectation that forms because of this idea that there is a being, that there is going to be an experience. Because how would you know that you exist if you're expecting something to exist? How would you know that you existed unless you had an experience, unless something happened? So what we find so ignorance leads to volitional formations, and because of these volitional formations, these volitional intentions to have an experience, lo and behold, experience arises. In the terms of the sensual world, it happens in a very particular way. Basically, here in the sense world, which is this universe that we are in, if there is an eyeball and light hits this eyeball, then a particular kind of consciousness will arise at the place of that impact, which will form a visual consciousness, yeah, for seeing something, yeah. But if it's a sound, a vibration striking an ear, then a sound consciousness, an ear consciousness will arise. And if it's a smell striking an olfactory receiver, then it will be a smell, yeah? And this is all kind of Yeah, I mean, is the Buddha basically describing what every school kid knows? Five senses, yeah? The Buddha talked about, five physical senses. And when I grew up, they were talking about five physical senses, and they were not the same five physical senses. Like, my school teachers were definitely not Buddhist. Yeah, they were not classically trained in Buddhism. And yet they talked about the same five senses. Yeah. So it's the Buddha pointing out that when there is the structure to have that kind of experience, it is possible to have that kind of experience, but you still need the volition for that experience to rise. But when there is that, yeah, when there is the expectation that there's going to be a being, a consciousness arising at that point, then it can. And this consciousness arises. And what the consciousness does is it helps bridge the gap between the rupa, which does not need consciousness, and the nama, the mind, which is separate. It has no location. Yeah, it has no substance, no core, no body. The mind doesn't have these things. To have an experience, there's gonna be rupa somewhere that is experienced. And so when this consciousness arises, this is what it arises for the purpose of. Vijnana is a word which means to cognize or to distinguish. And basically, the function of consciousness is to know that rupa is there. It's like that little thing that goes boop when it comes in contact with something. Consciousness is the mental framework becoming aware of a rupa, a dhamma, basically. And now that rupa can take many different forms. It can be in the form of a visual object, or it could be in the form of a sound, or it can be in the form of a smell. Yeah. But there's a thing there, and it is being experienced in one of those different ways. And depending on the structure that's receiving that information, that is coming in contact with it, is the kind of consciousness that arises. This is vijnana. And when we look at vijnana, we see that that these are all different experiences, fundamentally different experiences. First off, we see that consciousness is just this moment. When we talk about consciousness, we are saying there is this moment where boop, there is a sense that something is there, yeah, and that this something has these qualities. There is a sensation, or there is a sound, a vibration. There is an aroma. Which, how do you even talk about an aroma? And yet we know when we are smelling something. How do you describe a flavor? You can't. What is the flavor of a strawberry? What is the flavor of butter? You cannot describe this, and yet when you are having that experience, yeah? And that is what consciousness is. It is that moment of knowing that contact has been achieved. And this is what is happening. This is the mind wanting an experience, and so that is the moment when the experience is being had. Now, that is not quite enough. Rupa is an asteroid floating through space. There's a lot going on. It's following rules, it's spinning, pieces are breaking off, it's getting heated up by the sun, and then it's spinning around and it's cooling off because there's no sun. But the mind is usually not satisfied to just have this very simple experience that, like a person blundering through a dark room, and to bump into something and be like, okay, something's there, good. It's usually not enough for us. And so even though that this consciousness, this aggregate is just doing this, the mind is going to do some other things right after this moment of cognition. One of these things that the mind is going to do is going to be let's go to the middle. Is going to be called perception. And perception and the one preceding it, feeling, are happening almost simultaneously. But we are going to we'll talk about perception first. It should be obvious why. perception comes from the word is sanya, and that's a double construction. So sam means together or bringing together. It's a prefix, and nya means to know. It's the same nya that's in vijnana. Yeah, same nya means to know. But in terms of perception, sanya, it means to bring together knowledge. And sanya is a process. It's a process that the mind does to try to figure out what it has just come into contact with. So you have a consciousness, but that is not enough to form an idea of what's going on. So there is this mental process where the mind tries to figure out what this is, what this means. Unfortunately, this is the expectation behind this is a little diluted. Basically, what perception does is it takes this contact and then it looks through whatever data it has available. And there's two kinds of data. There's memories, and then there's imaginings. And these are the data it has to go off of. Basically, things that it has come in contact with in the past, and things that it can imagine based on all of the things that it has experienced, and maybe some things that it hasn't experienced. But it can kind of, chop these up and put one on another, and maybe it's like that. What Sanya is trying to do is it's trying to get an idea of the thing that consciousness is arising about. Yeah. I say it's partially diluted because if you think of like one molecule on your finger, based on that. And based on that touch consciousness, maybe you say, okay, well, this is, you can't even see it there. This is a microphone. Yeah. How does that match? It's like, how do you know, like, that is a microphone from just the one little feeling that you have of running your finger across it? You're assuming a lot there. Well, that's what perception does. It assumes a lot. And there's that famous parable about and the Buddhist story, but I think it predated the Buddha by quite a bit, of the five blind men. A king somewhere, wants to have a laugh. So he has his guards gather up five blind men, and he brings them out. And these five blind men have never come in contact with an elephant. And so he puts an elephant in the middle of the square, and he has these five blind men go up to it, but because they can't occupy the same place and have the same experience. One grabs the tail, and he's like, "Oh, an elephant! Oh, it's a lot like a broom." And one grabs the trunk, and he's like, "Oh, this is wow! This is what is this? It's like leathery, like a handbag." And one of them grabs the leg, and he's like, "Oh, this is solid. This is like a tree. An elephant is a kind of tree, I think." Yeah, and these five blind men all have a different experience. And maybe one of them just smells the elephant, and he's like, "Well, this is obviously a barn animal." And they all have these different experiences, and they start arguing with each other. The one who's saying it's like a broom starts arguing with the one who's saying it's like a tree, and it's like, what tree have you ever found that's so soft and bristly like this? And the blind men start beating each other up, and the king is just having a rip-roaring good time, laughing himself silly with it. But this is what perception does. Yeah, it goes with the limited information that it's got, and it tries to figure out what this thing is. And this is happening. So we look at, again, this is a tool. You can see these things arise, and knowing the consciousness is what it is just that moment of contact. You can then see how your mind is constantly trying to figure out what that contact was, what that contact is, what that contact might be in the next few moments. Yeah. and that you can see this process. And at times it's like a 3D movie. Yeah, there's a lot of substance to it, because you're not just operating from just sights. You're also operating from sounds and smells and flavors and sensations. Yeah, you're using all the data that you have available to you to try to figure this out. And if you can accept that that's what's happening, you might be able to leave it there. You might be able to accept the shortcomings of this and realize that your perception is not the consciousness, and that the consciousness is such a small amount of data, but happening so quickly that it's also not the perception. Yeah, it's very different. Yeah. Now, happening simultaneously with the perception, and during this process of perception, is what we call Vedana, or feeling. And feeling tone might be a better word for it, because we use the same word in English for feeling, for like when we feel something, when we have a tactile sensation, when we touch something, we say feeling. But again, this is a nama dhamma, this is a mental dhamma. So Vedana, it doesn't have a location. You're not actually feeling it in that way. Rather, this is feeling almost not totally in the emotional sense, but more like that than the other. This is feeling in the terms of the affect, the affective sense of this experience. Yeah. So through the process of perception, we're going to basically determine whether this contact is pleasant or painful or neutral. But then those are just categories. Yeah. If Vedana had form, if it had a location, if it had a substance, if it had a color, if it had a taste, if it had any of the things that the other aggregates had, then we might be able to say there are just these three kinds. But it doesn't. It doesn't. Vedana only has Vedana. Yeah. What we can say about Vedana is just what we see over time. We see that some things are appealing to us. Yeah. And some things are not appealing to us. And some things we don't have that response. We say they are neither appealing nor unappealing. Yeah. They are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. They are neither pleasurable nor painful. And so these are just three basic categories to help us try to figure out what's happening. But if we look at our experience moment to moment, then it's undeniable that this is happening. Yeah. There is this process there that is kind of flavoring, that is making this distinction about the experience. And again, all of this is proceeding from ignorance, proceeding from delusion. There's the expectation that there is a being here, that there is a person here, that there's a me here that is having this experience. And so in that context, it makes sense that the mind is trying to do this, because it's happening so quickly, this moment of contact, this consciousness. Trying to figure out what that consciousness is, that there's really not enough time to sit and think about it. Like, okay, this is this, should I have any more of it, or should I get away from it? It needs to happen simultaneously. So simultaneously with us figuring out what it is and trying to make some distinction about it is us trying to decide whether we want it or not. And that this is kind of directing the very next moment of the mind, looking for the very next experience. The final thing which we might notice, which is one of the more confusing of the aggregates, is called sankhara. And again, we have sam, which means together, and kara, which means to create or to build, to make. And the sankhara is a kind of catch-all term for any mental process which is connecting things. Yeah, sankharas are the kind of glue that moment to moment are connecting and bringing things together. Yeah, So sankhara is, is the same kind of word that was used for the volition that precedes consciousness. The expectation of an experience actually precedes any experience at all. So it's like, how does that work? But again, it's happening so quickly that it cycles on itself like that. But also during the experience, any belief that this is connected to that is the mind making this formation, yeah, in the same way a formation of troops, yeah. You have 50 troops, 50 soldiers standing in a field. You get them to line up in a kind of grid pattern. You call that a formation, yeah. Chemists, trying to figure out the structure of different elements. They create a new form of sugar, and they map it out, and they say, well, it's formed like this. You have this connects to that, connects to that. These are formations, yeah. And our mind is doing the same things invisibly, and so quickly that we just get a sense that it is happening, but we can nevertheless sense it is happening because we see it happening all the time. Yeah, there is a tingle somewhere in space, in time. This consciousness arises. There is a tingle, and then perception is saying that is our foot, and then feeling is saying our foot's tingling. I guess it's falling asleep. We should wiggle it around so that this doesn't get any worse. Sankhara, what brought all of those different things together. Yeah, all of the the Buddha says, what is it forming? Well, it's forming rupa. It's forming form, it's forming feeling, it's forming perception, it's forming other formations, and it's forming consciousness, yeah? So when all of the different little tingles in that general area of space and time were experienced through consciousness, through vijnana, so there was a sankhara that said, hey, those are all the same thing, yeah? And perception is trying to make sense of all of this. And it's saying, well, what was in that location last time I checked was a foot. And then, feelings going off saying, it didn't, last I checked, it wasn't doing that. So I think something is going wrong. And that's not good. All of these things are happening all together. And it's the sankhara which glues them together and helps us nurse and maintain this idea of this is one coherent experience happening, which helps us nurse this idea of an existing being, of the fundamental structural, thing that exists. This is a me, and this is what I am made of. And it is that idea brought together and compounded, kind of packed together and formed, which helps lead into the very next arising of consciousness. Well, then what? Okay, that's going on, and then what? Looking for the next arising of consciousness. Yeah? And these are our namadhammas, feeling, perception, sankhara, and consciousness. And we can see them, but we see that they are arising. And even if we see one of them arise, by the time we have seen it arise, the mind that is seeing, oh, look, that was just a sankhara, or oh, look, that was just a feeling, is the next mind after, because the two can't occupy the same moment, yeah? The mind that figures out that a sankhara just arose is not the sankhara that just arose, but is a mind saying, hey, look, a sankhara just arose. That these are following one after the next, after the next. So there is no stability to them. There is without sankharas, there is no sense that they are connected at all. Yeah. And because there is no stability to them, you cannot find any satisfaction in them. If you did, it would be gone the moment you experience that satisfaction, because again, the satisfaction would be the Vedana based on that experience. There is no happiness to be had because it's already gone by the time you recognize it. By the time it has happened, the next moment where you could try to hold on to it, it's already gone. And because you can't find any lasting satisfaction in these, why would you assume that there is any satisfaction to be had, that there is any being to have an experience? If you really watch, the Buddha said this is like the magician with the cups, and he puts the little ball under one of the cups, and then he shuffles them around. Yeah. Now, to the outside observer who is expecting there to be a ball under the cups, he's going to choose one of the cups and say, "Oh, there's a ball under there. There's an existing being under there." Lo and behold, the magician never put the ball under the cups. He kept it in his hand the whole time. It was a sleight of hand, and this is what our experience, our mental experience, is doing. Yeah. If we don't catch it, if we don't just look at the Dhammas, look at what is there, we get fooled by the magic trick into believing there is an actual being there, that it is moving through all of these experiences and is there for each one of them. But if we are willing to stop and to look, we can see that the only things that we can see are form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. And this is like us reaching the end of the universe and then deciding to turn back. We could ask questions about, well, what else is there? But we'd be asking questions about things that we can't really see, that we can't really experience, that we can't really know, that don't really exist right now. Yeah. And so how valid would those questions be? And would they really address the fundamental unifying point of asking the question in the first place? Because again, this is what these aggregates are for. And now, as I explain the aggregates, and I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this and you've heard them before, you've probably looked at some of these. And maybe with this as data, maybe you'll go and next time you're sitting in meditation, you'll look at them again. One thing we know and we experience as we meditate is that these are not the ultimate reality. Yeah. When we are sitting and looking and noting, okay, well, look at that. That's a formation. I just tried to put all of those things together. And we're like, oh, look, that was a feeling. I decided that was painful and I reacted to it. But it was just really a sensation fundamentally. And then it was the feeling I was reacting to more than the sensation itself. And we start seeing that, well, this actually doesn't make dinner. Yeah. This doesn't pay the bills. At some point we have to get up and we have to move about in the world. And so we go from the small scale to the big scale, or the big scale to the small scale. But this is not a fundamental reality. Yeah, this is not the end all be all. Our purpose and practice is not to get to a point where all we see is the five aggregates. Because it turns out that these five aggregates are actually, they're based on delusion. They're based on ignorance. They only arise because of the expectation you can't just have form. You can't just have rupa. There's got to be somebody there to have the rupa, to see the rupa, to smell the rupa, to taste the rupa. Otherwise, what would be the point? What would be the point of it all? And it's that very expectation that creates this being that is suffering, that is asking why. And now all of this structure is to help us when we're out, we're making dinner, when we're driving to the park, when we're talking to somebody and getting in an argument, is we step away from that experience and we ask why. What is this I'm feeling? What is it? This is dukkha. Why am I experiencing this dukkha? When we sit down and we can slow down, we can get out our microscope and we can look at the smallest possible scale, and it'll be like, well, the actual thing that happened, the contact, the consciousness was this. Yeah. And the perception, what I thought it was different than that. And it was this. And how I felt about that was different. And it was like this. Yeah. But all in all, there was just a thing there. I made all of this extra stuff out of it. Yeah. And then we get up and we step back and we walk away and we get done with this meditation, this experience. We'll maybe be wiser through that. Next time it happens, we won't get so drawn up. We won't make the sankharas, who won't try to connect all of the things, and will say, okay, this is happening. Oh, I'm seeing this way. Or, oh, that feels like this. I can feel a reaction coming on, but maybe I'm not going to run away with it. Yeah. And we stop expecting the things to connect, and we stop getting infatuated with things. We stop expecting them to please us. We stop recoiling when they displease us. And because of this, the whole expectation that there is a ball under the cup fades away. And with it fading away, we realize that there's no longer any expectation to cause it to keep happening. The interesting thing about these aggregates is they don't have to happen. There really can just be rupa. There really just can be stuff there happening. There doesn't have to be this being obsessing and making himself miserable about it, right? That's extra, and it doesn't have to be there. And a lot of it is just based on the expectation, the belief that there needs to be somebody there to experience it. But the rupa doesn't think that, as the rupa is just rupa, and it just is. And the Buddha said one of the imponderables of the universe, and the Buddha gives 4 of them. He says one of the things that it's just better not wondering about is the nature of the mind in jhana. Is when we reach a level of samadhi that these questions and this expectation of an existing being ceases, and is not immediately followed by, oh no, I need to exist, but it's just followed by, yeah, I don't need that. Is that these aggregates, they're not arising in this. They're the things that they're made of might be arising. There might be a sense, oh, this is nice, or oh, look, that's happening. But this whole static, congealed process that we go through moment to moment here in the sense world doesn't have to happen. Yeah, there really can just be an experience. And if you ever reach that level of samadhi, you realize that the experience doesn't need this extra thing of subjective, disconnected observer making a big deal out of it and misperceiving it and feeling about it and all of these things. It can really just be this thing. And that's when the true potential of the mind is unlocked. Yeah. Because all of that other stuff, the feeling, the perception, the sankhara, the consciousness, was just extra added on top. There really could just be matter. And when you don't cling to it, then it just arises and ceases. And where's the problem there? It just follows and is destroyed, and then more can be created. There doesn't even need to be anyone creating it. You don't need to answer that question. You don't need to look beyond the bounds of what can be known. You just accept that that's the nature of it. So these aggregates are sometimes called the Panchupat. I was going to say it in Pali, but I feel a tongue twister coming on. I'm not going to say it, but they're called the 5 clinging aggregates, or the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Panchupadana Kanda. I think that's it. Yeah. And this is how they are to be known. Yeah. These are not good things, but these are traps. Yeah. These are the things that the mind is doing that is help forming this experience that we call suffering. Yeah. And when we see them, when we get wise to them, we see that they are unstable, that they are not the source of our happiness, and that they are not us. They are just happening based on causes and conditions. When we let go of them, we become detached from them. When we become detached from them, then they can actually cease. And there is no reaction that tries to put them back in there. And when they are not there, then there is not suffering. And so seeing them wisely, whether in the small scale or, seeing the big scales, like, oh, that's that, and that's that, that's that. This should be the goal, the end product of them. And at the point where you have achieved this end goal of the ending of all clinging, the ending of all craving, the ending of all suffering, you don't need to know this list anymore at that point. Yeah. Because it will no longer be relevant. Yeah. And then the question has been answered, has been solved through the end of the question. So on the Uposatha night, I offer this for your reflection, and whatever is useful, take. Whatever is useless, just leave behind. And look at these 5 aggregates, and good luck. Yeah.